Thanks for joining us on this Sunday. It's been a bit of a roller coaster start to the fall sitting of the House of Commons. Already in the first week, we've seen a by-election upset, election speculation, lots of political posturing, and a security incident when NDP leader Jagmeet Singh confronted heckling protesters on Parliament Hill.
Was it you or not? If it was me, I'd admit it. Would you say that? I didn't see nothing. It wasn't me. It was a gentleman behind you, I guess. Who is it then? Point it out. I have no idea who it was, buddy. My word. You sure it's not you? No. 100%. You're a coward. You're not going to say it to my face. That's what's thought. Say what?
Now, MPs are calling for increased security, some saying that they simply don't feel safe on the Hill. Some of those calls include re-establishing a greater RCMP presence. Earlier, I spoke with Michele Paradis, the RCMP Assistant Commissioner in charge of protective policing. Assistant Commissioner Michele Paradis, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I want to start with the video of Mr. Singh. I'm sure you've seen it. It's kind of gone viral. Being followed by those protesters, then turning around and confronting them. What did you make of that encounter when you saw it?
I think it's difficult to assess it just on the face value. We don't know what happened before, nor do we know afterwards. But for us, for the RCMP and protection, the issue really is about that delicate balance between what is free speech and what is a threat, harassment, or intimidation. And trying to find in this environment that fine line and being able to clearly articulate that awful but lawful behavior still has an impression on those that are either MPs, ministers, or potentially candidates in the next election.
Okay, I'll come back to that. Awful but lawful is an awfully good way of putting it. Would you, though, recommend, or were you concerned that Mr. Singh decided to confront them? Is that something that you would tell people not to do? Do you understand why he did it? What would be your sort of police advice on that front?
I think it's a case-by-case basis. At some point, everybody reaches their breaking point. There needs to be a clear understanding that this rhetoric has consequences. How we will go about it is up to the individual.
Sure.
With the parliamentary police nearby, I think that this was one of those occasions where Leader Singh had probably reached a breaking point, and the protester was going after his character. So there's a lot going on in the background, and I would hate to judge anybody by one particular incident.
You talked about how you're struggling to walk that line between allowing people to protest freely versus harassment. And certainly we've seen a dramatic increase in harassment of public figures, politicians in particular. The RCMP, I think, is offering more protection than it ever has before. I don't think that Mr. Singh at the time had RCMP protection. So remind us how you determine which political leader, MP figure gets that protection.
The RCMP Act dictates that we are responsible for the protection of the Prime Minister, the Governor General, the Justice of the Supreme Court, the Ministers of the Crown, and any persons designated for protection by the Minister of Public Safety. But there's also a 1985 letter by the then Solicitor General, Herb Gray, who designated all MPs and their immediate family for protection. Now, the RCMP Act states that those are the ones that we will, are designated for protection. But the Act also says the RCMP can determine the level of protection based on threat and risk. And that's how we go about it. So at any time in the past, Leader Singh has had protection, and it ebb and flow based on, the threat environment, what we're seeing. And really, I keep coming back to protection is a shared responsibility. If we're not aware of harassment to an MP or minister, if we're not aware of that, we can't action that. And even if it's a series of, awful but lawful, we can determine whether or not there's an escalation in the language in those that we can potentially cut off right at the very beginning.
Right. As you know, this has sparked a whole conversation about security from MPs. The Liberal MP Pam Damoff sent a letter to the Sergeant-at-Arms saying that the level of harassment towards parliamentarians and staff is increasing, and she doesn't find the security acceptable. There has been conversations about the idea of the RCMP having a larger presence on Parliament Hill. What is the possibility of that? Is that something that the RCMP is actively looking at?
Well, the head of the Parliamentary Policing Service is an RCMP member. And they oversee 800 plus employees there. And I have full faith in their ability to be able to do this. But it's a very, again, it's a balancing. We want to be able to have our Parliament open and democracy to be forefront. We don't want to be, coming out with pressing the thumb down to say, you no longer can do this because of X, Y, Z. So it's finding, and I come back to that balance, and between the Sergeant at Arms, between PPS, between ourselves, between the polices of jurisdiction. And we're going to see this over the next we've got a year until an election that could
Maybe
come
sooner.
at any point. And everybody's got a role in this. And, how do we encourage candidates to come into our democratic process if they're frightened for themselves or their families?
You said you're preparing, getting ready for an election campaign and preparing. I don't know if you can tell me, but what kinds of things is the RCMP preparing for? Because we even saw in the last election, it was a different level too of threat, I think, against many candidates. What are you preparing for this time?
Again, that. And so we are having monthly threat assessments and looking at not only what's happening here in Canada with the elections, but elections, whether it's the UK's recent or an upcoming American election. And how does that feed in? And then as we're getting closer, those will probably be daily, and during the elections there will be daily assessments, looking at all the candidates, looking at the parties, and looking at the locations they're going to.
You say people have to obviously alert you to threats and things that they're feeling so that you can deal with it. What would you say to politicians who are engaging in rhetoric that might be provoking this kind of behavior, divisive rhetoric, let's just call it that? What would you say to politicians who are doing that?
Well, I think it's that balance again. The last thing you want is for the RCMP to come in and say, "Stop what you're doing."
Yeah.
This is a free democratic process that we want to encourage, and we're not the ones that are going to go in and, forgive me for this, police this election.
Yeah. I'll just end on this. How would you sort of characterize the threat environment against politicians right now?
I've never seen it like this. We have never, as an organization, had as many protective packages on people right now. And that has a lot to do with the situation going on worldwide, whether it's the conflict in Israel, whether it's the Ukraine, whether it's going on all over the world, and it's having an impact on what we're seeing here. So the threat environment is really scattered, but it's with the social media now, it's able to pinpoint specifics, and it's able to mobilize movements. And we saw this in Toronto when the Prime Minister was going to an event with the Italian Prime Minister, and the protesters were able to mobilize large numbers outside of the Art Gallery of Ontario, and quickly escalated to violence. So we're seeing that, but we're also keeping an eye on that.
Assistant Commissioner Paradis, thank you. That was really informative. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much.
It was a big Hollywood production in which he announced the end to the carbon tax coalition, but it was all a lie. Jagmeet Singh is a fake, a phony, a fraud, and a liar. And the people of Canada cannot trust anything that he says going forward.
That's the Conservative leader made those comments on Friday. There was some sort of altercation between Singh and Pierre Poilievre on Thursday, which caused Singh to leave his seat and challenge Pierre Poilievre when he was talking about his pension. All of this comes after Singh's viral confrontation with an Ottawa protester. So lots to talk about with our Sunday Scrum. Paul Wells, a journalist and author, joins us from Ottawa. Emily Nicolas, columnist with Le Devoir in Montreal, and Gary Mason, a columnist with the Globe and Mail in Vancouver. I mean, there's two things going on, but they are, I think, connected. And even the commissioner, assistant deputy commissioner I had from the RCMP at the top of the show said the same, right? This is about sort of divisive rhetoric, inflamed rhetoric, and then how that plays out either in real life with people or inside the House of Commons. Let's start with the Singh video. Émilie, what did you make of how Mr. Singh chose to handle that? And what that kind of tells you about access to politicians on Parliament Hill.
Yes, before we get to Singh, I just want to say, because it was just so striking as I was watching this clip, the rhythm at which Pierre Poilievre is blinking when he's saying those words. I wish people could watch that back. That's not about having something in your eye. He knows, like, you don't have to be an expert in body language to know that he knows he's pushing it as he's saying those words. Anybody who's sensitive, who's attuned to body language will understand what I'm saying right now. Now back to Jagmeet Singh.
Yeah, speaking of body language.
Yes, that you can see is coming from a narrative that Jagmeet Singh has tried to put forward about his life for many, many years now, even ever since he ran for the NDP leadership. The idea that he's the one who was bullied as a kid and knows how to stand up to bully, stand up to intimidation. That's a metaphor he's been using throughout his entire tenure as leadership of the NDP party. And so there's moments in politics, Justin Trudeau has also his moments in politics when you know that it's touching to the core of why he's there. Yeah. When it comes to standing to bully, it touches to Jagmeet Singh's core of why he's there. It doesn't mean that the way he's doing it is necessarily always the wisest because he has this personal narrative of I'm going to be strong. It's not necessarily sustainable for every MP to behave that way. No. And it puts pressure of MPs to just stand for themselves rather than ask for a system that's actually going to be protecting them. But the reason why he's so strongly taking individual responsibility for his own protection, regardless of how wise that is or not, it's very much tied to his whole personal narrative and why he's in politics in the first place.
Yeah, and we should say there was a Liberal MP who said he was pushed by a protester. Told my colleague Catherine Cullen that on the House yesterday, and obviously it was not the same kind of altercation because not everyone feels comfortable doing what Mr. Singh did. What do you make of that? And then, Gary, the fact that Mr. Singh stood up in the House of Commons and said to Pierre Poilievre, "Hey, bro, you want to talk to me? Come down here and talk to me." Like, it was a very strange moment and something that you couldn't really see on camera.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I the confrontation on the Hill with the protester, I think there were some of us that were looking at that and were very happy that he stood up to this guy, this bully, and the bully backed down. And I think there was probably even some of us that were privately hoping that the bully pushed Mr. Singh or something like that, because that guy would have been on the ground in about a half a second. Mr. Singh is a championship jiu-jitsu, fighter who can definitely take care of himself. I mean, you almost hate to say that, but at some point, you have to put bullies in their place. And I think, his frustration, carried over to the House of Commons. I mean, he sees Pierre Poilievre as a bully too, another form of a bully. And I think he sort of called him out. And, you don't like to see it, but at some point, politicians are just human beings, and sure. And their frustrations boiled over. And I think that happened with him.
Yeah, I would say the moment, certainly with the protester, was an authentic moment, Paul, a genuine moment for Mr. Singh. I don't know I wasn't in the House when that happened. I don't know how, whether that was thought through or planned. I'm not sure. But it is maybe troubling that that's where we are 1 week into this sitting.
Yeah, and I expect it's going to continue essentially indefinitely. I find these issues hard to have hard and fast rules on. Sure. The House of Commons is the people's place, and the streets and fields around it have been the site of protest for much longer than I've been covering politics. When I was a young political reporter back in the 20th century, I got used to walking past people brandishing very large photos, graphic photos of aborted fetuses most days, on the way into the House of Commons. People with very personal grievances. They don't like the way their file has been handled. Often strap on a sandwich board and fly the Canadian flag upside down, and occasionally even accost members of Parliament. And you want that to be something that people can do, because this is, after all, a sometimes unruly democracy. It has drastically ramped up since the Freedom Convoy. A lot of these folks on the Hill these days are essentially people for whom the Freedom Convoy was the most exciting moment in their adult lives, and they don't want it to end. And so, between a handful and a few dozen are on the Hill every day. And they honestly feel like they've been bullied by the government, and they have a hard time sort of picking the proper tone with which to talk back.
Yeah.
I don't know that that's a security problem, but it is just a hell of a hassle for anyone who legitimately needs the House of Commons and the area around it to be their workplace. People, I assume that when I walk up the Hill, most people don't recognize me as journalist and author Paul Wells, but random folks frequently jam a camera phone into my face and insist that I answer kind of random questions about their conception of public life. And honestly, I'm on the Hill about 5 or 6 times a year. There are people who have to go up there every day, and their patience is wearing very thin. And when the leader of the opposition calls people a fake, fraud, liar, and whatever, after he is richly on the record having not kept some of his own promises, when Pierre Poilievre was a young man, he wrote big Hollywood production that members of Parliament should resign after their second term in office. He didn't resign after his second term, his third, his fourth, his fifth, his sixth. He's on his 7th. How would he like it if people called him a fake, a fraud, a liar, and a phony?
Emily, how does that language from Mr. Poilievre contribute to these issues, do you think? I mean, everyone has bad language, let's be clear, but it was, to your point, pushing it probably a bit further on last week.
It is troubling. It is troubling. And there has been lies and people pushing it everywhere around the House of Commons, but there is a difference in the level at which Pierre Poilievre is doing this, and this needs to be named without being it about agreeing or disagreeing with his ideology. I think there needs to be a point where we see in Canada something like the movements of Republicans who just could not stand Donald Trump in terms of his style and the way he approaches democracy. There needs to be a moment in which it is possible for people to agree with some of what Pierre Poilievre stands for ideologically, and also be able to say the way he's doing politics doesn't speak for us. And there hasn't been a voice in Canada for that yet.
Yeah.
And it's not about being red-Tory or more centrist Tory. It really is about, do you respect democracy or not?
Yeah.
Do you respect Parliament or not?
Okay.
And I really, I'm calling for whoever is listening, if you fit that model, that demographic, maybe you need to think about that, because this is really worrisome.
Gary, I have like 20 seconds. I'm sorry, friend.
Yeah, no problem. Quickly, I think Pierre Poilievre uses that language because it's working for him with a certain element of his base. However, if Pierre Poilievre does become prime minister, his language will change. It will have to. He'll be responsible generally for the conduct and the ramifications of that kind of language. And I would expect him to tone down his language. So we'll see.
Got to go. Paul, Emily, Gary, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Thanks for spending part of it with us. Appreciate it.
Thanks.